The glow of the computer monitor cast long, flickering shadows across the walls of the Midoriya apartment, painting the small bedroom in hues of brilliant gold, deep red, and the blinding white of an explosion. 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya sat entranced, his small hands gripping the armrests of his computer chair with white-knuckled intensity. He had seen this video 1,000 times. He knew every pixel, every soundbite, every rumble of the crushed concrete, and every scream of the terrified onlookers. It was an old video, grainy and poorly framed, recorded by an amateur cameraman with trembling hands during a catastrophic disaster years ago. On the screen, a crumbling cityscape was choked by toxic smoke and the debris of fallen skyscrapers. The flames roared, a chaotic symphony of destruction. But then, a laugh cut through the devastation. It was a booming, fearless sound that seemed to shatter the very concept of despair. "Fear not, citizens!" The figure on the screen bellowed, his massive silhouette emerging from the fiery wreckage with an impossible burden, a collapsed bus filled with people, hoisted effortlessly upon his shoulders. "Hope has arrived. Because I am here." Izuku's breath hitched, just as it did every single time. His emerald eyes, wide and shining with unshed tears of pure adoration, reflected the bright, unwavering smile of the symbol of peace. All Might, the greatest hero in the world. "Mom!" Izuku called out, his voice a high, excited chirp that barely concealed his overwhelming emotion. He twisted in his seat, nearly falling out of the oversized chair. "Mom, look! He's so cool! He saves everyone with a smile, no matter how scary it is." Inko Midoriya stood in the doorway, a soft, affectionate smile curving her lips as she leaned against the frame. She held a basket of freshly folded laundry, but her attention was entirely on her son. She had lost count of how many times he had asked to watch this specific video. It was his anchor, his obsession, and his ultimate dream. "He is very cool," Izuku, Inko said softly, walking over to ruffle his unruly, forest green curls. "Are you going to be a hero just like him?" Izuku spun his chair around, holding up an All Might action figure in one hand and pumping his other fist into the air. "Yeah. When I get my quirk, I'm gonna be the best hero ever. I'll save people with a smile, just like him." Inko's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of maternal anxiety crossing her features before she quickly masked it. "I know you will, sweetie," she murmured, kissing the top of his head. "I know you will." As she walked out of the room, Izuku turned back to the screen, watching the video loop again. But beneath his boundless enthusiasm, a small, quiet seed of doubt had begun to take root in his 4-year-old mind. It was the age of quirks. 80% of the global population possessed some kind of superhuman ability, ranging from the mundane, like pulling one's eyes out of their sockets, to the godlike. These abilities typically manifested by the age of 4. Izuku had turned 4 nearly 2 months ago. All of his friends at preschool had already begun to show signs of their quirks. Even Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend, whom Izuku affectionately called Kaken, had recently awakened an incredibly powerful quirk. Kaken could sweat a nitroglycerin-like substance from his palms and ignite it at will, creating brilliant, concussive explosions. It was a flashy, powerful, undeniable hero's quirk. The teachers praised him, the other kids followed him like ducklings, and Kaken's already immense pride had swelled into a colossal sense of superiority. But Izuku? Nothing. No flames, no telekinesis like his mother, no fire-breathing like his absent father. Nothing but a painfully normal boy who loved heroes. He stared down at his hands, small and unblemished. "It'll happen soon," he told himself, trying to channel All Might's unshakable confidence. "It has to. I'm going to be a hero." The playground was bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light of the mid-afternoon sun. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning sugar, a smell that Izuku had come to associate exclusively with Katsuki Bakugo. "Make me!" Katsuki's voice rang out, sharp and dripping with arrogance. Izuku stood frozen behind a large oak tree, peering around the rough bark. A few yards away, in the center of a sandy clearing, Katsuki stood with his hands on his hips, a smirk playing across his lips. Flanking him were 2 of his usual lackeys, a boy with leathery, bat-like wings, and another with unnaturally long fingers. On the ground in front of them lay a small boy, clutching a scraped knee and crying softly. The boy had accidentally bumped into Katsuki while they were playing tag, a minor offense that Katsuki had deemed worthy of a harsh shove into the dirt. "You're in my way, extra," Katsuki sneered, stepping closer to the crying boy. He raised his right hand, the palm glowing with a faint, menacing orange light. Small, localized explosions popped across his skin like firecrackers. Pop, pop, sizzle. "You think just because you have a weak little quirk you can bump into me? I'm going to be the #1 hero. You're just a stepping stone." The two lackeys snickered, feeding off Katsuki's cruel bravado. Izuku felt a cold knot form in his stomach. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct in his small, quirkless body screamed at him to stay hidden, to run away, to find an adult. Katsuki was dangerous now. His explosions hurt. They left burns and bruises, and Katsuki never held back, convinced that his power gave him absolute authority over the weak. But as Izuku watched the crying boy cower on the ground, his mind flashed back to the video. He saw the ruined city. He saw the towering silhouette of All Might. "Fear not, citizens. Hope has arrived." Before his brain could fully process what his legs were doing, Izuku was moving. He darted out from behind the tree, his red sneakers kicking up puffs of dust as he sprinted across the playground. He skidded to a halt, placing himself squarely between Katsuki and the fallen boy. He threw his arms out wide, taking a defensive stance. His knees were knocking together so hard they threatened to give out, and tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, blurring his vision. But he didn't move. "Keikaku, stop!" Izuku yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and desperation. Katsuki paused, his crimson eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his childhood friend. The smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl of pure irritation. The miniature explosions in his palms ceased for a moment, leaving a wisp of gray smoke curling into the air. "Deku?" Katsuki spat the nickname, a cruel pun on Izuku's name that meant useless, with venomous disdain. "What the hell are you doing? Get out of my way." Izuku swallowed hard, tasting dust and fear. "Why, you're making him cry, Kaken! Can't you see he's hurt? If you keep going, I'll stop you myself." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Even the cicadas in the nearby trees seemed to stop their incessant buzzing. The two lackeys stared at Izuku as if he had just sprouted a second head. Then Katsuki threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't the boisterous, reassuring laugh of All Might. It was sharp, mocking, and cruel. "You stop me?" Katsuki stepped forward, punching his fist into his open palm. A loud crack echoed across the playground as a burst of fire and smoke erupted from his hands. "You don't even have a quirk, Deku! You're completely quirkless. You're nothing." Izuku trembled violently. He was right. He had no power. He had no way to fight back. If Katsuki attacked him, he would be burned. He would be beaten. But as he glanced over his shoulder at the weeping boy behind him, a strange, profound calm washed over his panic. He couldn't move. He wouldn't move. "I won't let you hurt him," Izuku whispered, closing his eyes tightly, bracing himself for the inevitable pain. "Then you can burn with him," Katsuki roared. With the explosive power of his quirk propelling him forward, Katsuki lunged. He covered the distance between them in a split second, his right hand pulled back, glowing with concentrated heat and volatile sweat. He aimed a vicious, explosive right hook directly at Izuku's chest. Izuku crossed his arms over his face, shrinking in on himself. He waited for the searing heat. He waited for the deafening roar of the explosion. Instead, he felt cold. It started as a pinprick of icy pressure deep within his chest, right where his heart beat frantically. In a fraction of a millisecond, that pressure exploded outward. It didn't hurt. Rather, it felt like a dam had burst open inside his very soul, releasing a torrent of surging, thrumming energy. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The world seemed to have slowed down to a crawl. Katsuki was suspended in midair, his fist inches away from Izuku, the orange fire just beginning to blossom from his pores. But Izuku wasn't looking at Katsuki. He was looking at his own hands. His skin was glowing. A brilliant, blinding, luminescent azure blue light was bleeding through his flesh, illuminating the blood vessels beneath his skin. A loud, resonant humming sound filled the air, a sound like a tuning fork vibrating at an impossible frequency. What is this? Izuku thought, his fear entirely eclipsed by all. The blue light surged down his arms, pooling into his palms. The energy demanded release. It felt heavy, ancient, and unyielding. Instinctively, without knowing how or why, Izuku thrust his hands forward, meeting Katsuki's incoming attack. He didn't hit flesh. Shatter! A sound like 1,000 glass panes breaking simultaneously echoed with a deafening roar across the park. From the dirt directly between Izuku and Katsuki, the earth ruptured violently. A massive, jagged spire of translucent, glowing blue crystal erupted from the ground. It didn't grow, it burst into existence, manifesting from the ambient energy and Izuku's will. The crystal was beautiful and terrifying, shimmering with an inner light that cast dancing blue reflections across the playground. Katsuki's explosive punch slammed directly into the flat facet of the crystal spire. The resulting detonation was loud, but instead of shattering the crystal, the explosion was entirely absorbed. The sheer kinetic force of Katsuki's attack bounced off the indestructible surface, sending Katsuki flying backward. The blond boy tumbled through the dirt, skidding to a halt near his dumbfounded lackeys, his eyes wide with shock. Izuku stood frozen, his hands still outstretched, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stared at the towering blue crystal in front of him. It was taller than an adult, humming with that same resonant frequency he had felt in his chest. It felt like an extension of his own body. What did you do? Katsuki yelled, scrambling to his feet, clutching his smoking right hand. His face was twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. What the hell is that, Deku? Izuku opened his mouth to speak, to say he didn't know, but the humming of the crystal suddenly changed in pitch. It grew louder, sharper. The core of the blue crystal began to swirl. It looked as though the solid mass was turning into liquid right before their eyes. The deep azure color shifted, swirling with currents of sea green and cerulean. Crack! Crack! Boom! The top half of the crystal spire exploded outward, not into dangerous shrapnel, but into a massive, cascading wave of pure, high-pressure water. The water didn't splash onto the ground. It defied gravity, swirling and coalescing into a distinct shape. Izuku gasped, stumbling backward and falling onto his backside as he stared up at the impossible being forming before him. The water solidified, taking on the dense, muscular form of a towering, bipedal crocodilian creature. The being was composed entirely of hypercompressed water, yet it wore jagged, asymmetrical armor crafted from the exact same blue crystal that had birthed it. In its massive, webbed hands, the creature gripped a gigantic bow made of the blue crystal, a glowing hydro arrow already knocked and drawn tight on the crystalline string. The creature's eyes, glowing with a fierce, protective intelligence, locked onto Katsuki. Katsuki froze, his instincts screaming at him. The sheer presence of the water construct was overwhelming. It radiated a heavy, suffocating pressure, like the depths of the ocean. The construct didn't speak, but it moved with fluid, lethal grace. It aimed its massive crystal bow at the ground directly at Katsuki's feet and released the string. The hydro arrow shot forward faster than the eye could track. It struck the dirt with the force of a localized typhoon. A geyser of freezing water erupted, washing over Katsuki and his lackeys, instantly dousing the heat of Bakugo's palms and knocking all three boys flat onto their backs in the mud. Silence descended on the playground, broken only by the sound of dripping water and the panicked whimpers of the lackeys. The crocodilian construct slowly lowered its bow. It turned its massive, watery head to look down at Izuku. The fierce, intimidating aura vanished instantly, replaced by a feeling of steadfast loyalty and warmth. It bowed its head slightly in reverence to the small boy sitting in the dirt. Izuku looked at his hands, then at the towering blue crystal, and finally at the water warrior standing guard over him. The connection was undeniable. He could feel the creature's presence in his mind, a well of stamina, strength, and elemental power waiting to be directed. He could feel the density of the crystal, knowing instinctively that it was harder than diamonds, shaped by his desire to protect. A radiant, blinding smile broke across Izuku's face, tears finally spilling over his freckled cheeks. I have a quirk. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a sterile environment that did nothing to soothe Inko Midoriya's fraying nerves. She sat on the edge of the uncomfortable vinyl chair, her hands wringing a shredded tissue into oblivion. Beside her, Izuku was practically vibrating with energy. His legs swung back and forth, unable to touch the floor, and his eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. He wasn't scared. He was ecstatic. When the police had called Inko, telling her there had been an incident at the playground involving Izuku and a massive, localized elemental manifestation, she had nearly fainted. She had envisioned the worst, that her sweet, quirkless boy had been caught in the crossfire of a villain attack. But when she arrived, she found Izuku covered in mud, laughing hysterically as police officers tried and failed to chip away at a massive, indestructible blue crystal embedded in the sandbox. Now they were waiting for the results of a comprehensive quirk assessment. Midoriya, a tall, balding doctor with round spectacles and a bushy mustache, stepped into the waiting room, holding a thick manila folder. Dr. Tsubasa had been Izuku's pediatrician since birth. He was the same doctor who, just weeks prior, had scheduled an X-ray to check for the extra toe joint that typically indicated a quirkless nature. Dr. Tsubasa. Inko stood up so fast she nearly tripped. Is he okay? The police said he created a monster made of water. Is it a mutation? Is it dangerous? Please calm down, Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa said, his tone professional but laced with an undeniable undercurrent of fascination. He gestured for them to follow him down the hall. Izuku is perfectly healthy. In fact, he is quite extraordinary. Please come into my office. Once they were seated in the small examination room, Dr. Tsubasa opened the folder, pulling out a series of brain scans and blood test results. He pushed his glasses up his nose, looking at Izuku with a newfound respect. To put it simply, Mrs. Midoriya, we had to cancel the toe joint X-ray, Dr. Tsubasa began, leaning back in his chair. There is no need for it. Your son has awakened a quirk, and it is, without a doubt, one of the most complex and unique abilities I have encountered in my 30 years of practice. Izuku bounced in his seat. I have a quirk. I have a quirk. He chanted softly, unable to contain his joy. Inko pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears. Oh, Izuku. I'm so happy for you. But doctor, what exactly is it? It's not fire like his father, and it's not telekinesis like mine. Quirks are often genetic, yes, but occasionally, two seemingly unrelated quirks can mutate and synthesize into an entirely new, dominant ability, Dr. Tsubasa explained, tapping a pen against the desk. Your minor telekinesis, the ability to manipulate objects, and his father's fire-breathing, and elemental emitter ability, have combined in a highly irregular way. He pulled a small, sealed plastic bag from his pocket. Inside was a tiny, glowing blue shard. The police managed to recover this after the main structure Izuku created eventually destabilized and shattered into dust, the doctor said, holding it up. We analyzed it in the lab. It is a completely unknown element. It is incredibly dense, practically indestructible to blunt force, and acts as a superconductor for raw, kinetic, and elemental energy. I took the liberty of asking Izuku what it felt like when he made it. Dr. Tsubasa looked at the boy. Izuku, can you tell your mother what you told me? Izuku nodded vigorously, his curls bouncing. It felt like catching something. Like I was making a cage to stop Kaken's explosion from hurting anyone. I wanted to trap the bad thing so it couldn't get out. Exactly, Dr. Tsubasa smiled. Izuku doesn't just create this crystal. He shapes it. From what we can hypothesize based on the playground incident, this quirk is a dual type. It is an emitter quirk, allowing him to generate this crystalline substance. Let's call it Traptanium for now, based on his description. But it also borders on a summoning quirk. Inko looked bewildered. Summoning? Like the water creature? Precisely. The crystal acts as a medium. Izuku channeled his desire to protect into the crystal, and the crystal converted his stamina into a physical, sentient construct made of water. A guardian. A trap master, if you will. Dr. Tsubasa leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. The limits of this ability are currently unknown. Can he create other elements? Fire? Earth? Can he shape the crystal into weapons instead of constructs? The potential is staggering. Izuku's eyes were practically sparkling like the very crystals he could create. I can make swords? And shields? And more monsters to help me fight? It is highly likely, young man, the doctor chuckled. However, it will require immense physical stamina and mental discipline. The crystal is tied to your own energy reserves. If you create too much, or if a construct is destroyed, it will exhaust you. But with training, you will have an incredibly versatile arsenal at your disposal. Inko exhaled a long, shaky breath, wiping tears from her cheeks. So, he can be a hero, Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa said softly, looking at the glowing blue shard in his hand. With a quirk like this, he won't just be a hero. He will be a one-man tactical squad. For official registration purposes, what would you like to name the quirk, Izuku? Izuku didn't even have to think about it. The word had been echoing in his mind since the crystal first erupted. Trap team, Izuku said firmly, his small hands balling into determined fists. I'm going to trap all the villains and keep everyone safe. The dynamic of the playground shifted over the next week in a way that left the teachers baffled and the other children in awe. For the past year, Katsuki Bakugo had been the undisputed king of the sandbox. His explosions were the benchmark by which all other quirks were judged. He was the alpha, the destined hero, the strongest. And Izuku, quirkless, timid, crying Izuku, had been his favorite punching bag, the baseline of weakness that made Katsuki feel even stronger. That hierarchy had been shattered as easily as glass. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze ruffled the leaves of the oak trees. Izuku was sitting alone near the swings, a brand new, pristine spiral notebook resting on his lap. On the cover, written in messy, crayon block letters, read, Hero Analysis for My Future Volume 1. He was furiously scribbling notes, trying to draw a picture of the water construct he had summoned. He was trying to remember every detail, the crystalline armor, the shape of the bow, the feeling of the water pressure. He hadn't been able to summon the construct again since that day, though he had managed to create small shards of the blue traptanium in the palm of his hand. His mother had strictly forbidden him from practicing his quirk in the house after he accidentally grew a crystal spike through the coffee table. A shadow fell over his notebook. Izuku stopped drawing and looked up. Katsuki stood there. The blond boy's hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. The usual arrogant smirk was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his crimson eyes were burning with a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and a strange, unfamiliar intensity. Behind Katsuki, his usual lackeys hovered nervously at a safe distance, casting wary glances at Izuku as if expecting him to suddenly erupt into a giant water monster. Izuku tensed. Old habits died hard, and his instinct was still to flinch, to apologize for breathing Katsuki's air. But as he looked at the blond boy, he realized he didn't feel the suffocating terror he used to. He felt the cold, reassuring thrum of the crystal energy resting dormant in his chest. He was no longer defenseless. Kaken, Izuku said, his voice steady, though he kept his hands resting on his notebook, ready to move if necessary. You hid it from me, Katsuki accused, his voice low, dangerously quiet. You had a quirk this whole time, and you made me look like an idiot. Izuku's eyes widened in genuine surprise. What? No. Kaken, I swear. I didn't have it. It just happened that day. When you tried to punch me, I got so scared, and then the blue light happened, and the crystal. Shut up. Katsuki snapped, pulling his hands out of his pockets. Small sparks danced across his knuckles, but he didn't raise his fists. He stared at Izuku, his jaw clenched tight. A giant crystal that absorbs my explosions. A freakish water lizard that shoots arrows. That's a strong quirk, Deku. Hearing Katsuki call his quirk strong was so jarring that Izuku momentarily forgot how to speak. Katsuki took a step closer, towering over the sitting green-haired boy. He pointed a finger aggressively at Izuku's chest. Listen to me, you damn nerd, Katsuki growled, the fierce, competitive fire returning to his eyes, burning brighter than ever. You might have finally gotten a flashy quirk. You might have gotten a lucky shot on me. But don't you dare think for a single second that this makes you better than me. Izuku blinked. I never thought that, Kaken. I just want to be a hero. I'm going to be the #1 hero!" Katsuki shouted, his voice echoing across the playground, drawing the attention of the teachers. "I'm going to surpass All Might! And I'm going to crush you along the way! Your stupid crystals and water monsters won't mean squat when my explosions are big enough to level a mountain!" Instead of cowering, instead of crying, something entirely new bloomed inside Izuku's chest. It wasn't the icy calm of the Traptanium. It was a spark of fire, a competitive drive that he had never allowed himself to feel when he was quirkless. For the first time in his life, he was on an even playing field with his idol, his friend, and his tormentor. Katsuki didn't see him as a bug to be squashed anymore. He saw him as a rival. He saw him as a threat to his absolute supremacy. Izuku slowly stood up from the swing. He was slightly shorter than Katsuki, but he didn't shrink away. He met Katsuki's furious crimson gaze with unwavering emerald determination. "I'm going to be a hero too, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice remarkably clear and resolute for a 4-year-old. "My quirk is called Trap Team. And I'm going to train as hard as I can. I'm going to learn how to use every element. I'm going to learn how to make swords and shields, and I'll protect everyone." Izuku stepped forward, closing the distance, his own hands clenching into fists. "I won't lose to you, Kaken. I'm going to save people with a smile, and I'm going to be a great hero." Katsuki stared at him, seemingly taken aback by the sheer audacity of Deku talking back to him. Then, a fierce, almost feral grin spread across his face. He slammed a fist into his palm, producing a loud, concussive bang that made the nearby swings rattle. "Bring it on, Deku," Katsuki snarled. "Just try and keep up." With that, Katsuki spun on his heel and stomped away, his lackeys scrambling to follow him. Izuku watched him go, his heart pounding in his chest. His breathing was shallow, the adrenaline fading, leaving him slightly trembling. But as he looked down at his hands, a faint, beautiful blue glow shimmered beneath his skin. He didn't need to wish upon a falling star anymore. He didn't need to cry himself to sleep wondering why he was born defective. He didn't need to wait for a miracle or a handout. He had the power to protect. He had the power to fight. Izuku sat back down on the swing, picked up his crayon, and flipped to the first blank page of his notebook. He closed his eyes, recalling the exact shade of the crystal, the precise pressure of the water. He began to draw, his mind racing with possibilities. If he could create water to counter Katsuki's fire, could he create earth to withstand physical blows? Could he create fire of his own? Could he trap a villain inside the crystal itself? What were the limitations of the Traptanium? How heavy was it? Could he control the constructs, or did they act on their own instincts? 10 years. He had 10 years before the entrance exam for UA High School, the most prestigious hero academy in the nation. 10 years to master an ability that no one in the world had ever seen before. 10 years to turn a defensive shield into an ultimate arsenal. The quirkless boy was dead. In his place sat an analytical genius with a power bounded only by his imagination and stamina. As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the playground, Izuku Midoriya smiled. It wasn't the boisterous, overwhelming smile of All Might. It was small, quiet, and filled with an unbreakable resolve. The trap was set. And the world of heroes would never be the same. The years that followed the awakening of Trap Team were a blur of grueling experimentation, shattered glass, and relentless study. Izuku quickly learned that his quirk was as dangerous to him as it was to his potential enemies. Traptanium was not a passive element. It was volatile, demanding, and required an iron will to shape. When he was 6, he tried to summon a fire elemental construct. He had been visualizing the roaring flames of a forest fire, wanting to create a night of pure heat. Instead, his focus slipped for a fraction of a second. The resulting crystal erupted not as a guardian, but as a fragmented bomb of jagged, red-hot shrapnel. If he hadn't instinctively thrown up a barrier of dense, earth-aligned traptanium, he would have been severely burned. That incident taught him a vital lesson: intention was everything. His bedroom transformed from a simple shrine to All Might into a veritable laboratory of heroic theory and crystalline mastery. Alongside the posters of the symbol of peace were complex anatomical charts, geological encyclopedias, and thousands of pages of meticulous notes on every pro-hero and villain in the public eye. Izuku didn't just want to rely on raw power, he wanted to understand the mechanics of combat. If he was going to use elemental weapons, he needed to know how to wield them. He begged his mother to enroll him in martial arts classes. Inko, terrified of the danger but fiercely supportive of her son's dream, agreed. He took up kendo to understand the balance and flow of swordsmanship. He studied aikido to learn how to redirect an opponent's momentum, a philosophy that perfectly complemented his desire to trap and subdue, rather than destroy. By the time he was 10, he had established a fundamental control over his core elements. The water element was his most reliable, likely due to it being his first awakening. He could summon his crocodilian guardian, whom he affectionately named Snapshot in his notebooks, though the construct could not speak to confirm the moniker, with a mere thought and a flick of his wrist. Alternatively, he could shape the blue traptanium into a fluid, elegant broadsword that rippled with hydrokinetic force. The earth element was defensive, heavy, and brutally effective. The crystals were a deep, opaque amber. When wielding earth, he didn't summon a construct. Instead, he favored a massive, jagged hammer that could shatter concrete with a single swing, anchoring him to the ground and making him practically immovable. The fire element remained tricky. It was aggressive and consumed his stamina faster than the others. The crystals were a violent ruby red. When he used fire, he preferred to mold the traptanium into dual, serrated daggers that superheated the air around them, allowing him to slice through steel like butter. And then there was tech. The tech element was an unexpected discovery that occurred when Izuku was 12. He had been frustrated while trying to fix a broken toaster, absent-mindedly channeling his quirk. A bizarre, geometrically perfect, neon-orange crystal had formed over his hand. When he touched the toaster, the crystal interfaced with the machinery, allowing him to manipulate its internal components with his mind. He realized he could use the tech crystals to hack, commandeer, and sabotage electronics, turning the modern world into his personal playground. But the physical toll was immense. Every time he summoned a crystal, it drew from his body's lipid and caloric reserves. If he pushed himself too hard, the crystals would become brittle, prone to shattering under stress. Worse, if a summoned construct was destroyed in battle, the psychic backlash would leave Izuku reeling with intense migraines and muscle fatigue. He had to be smart. He had to be strategic. He couldn't just spam his powers like Kaken did. He had to analyze his opponent, choose the perfect element to counter them, execute the trap, and apprehend them efficiently. His rivalry with Katsuki Bakugo only fueled his growth. They were no longer the bully and the victim. They were a collision of opposing forces, constantly orbiting each other in a state of tense, unspoken respect wrapped in fierce hostility. Middle school at Aldera Junior High was a battleground. Katsuki had grown into a powerhouse. His explosions were devastating, his combat instincts unmatched, and his physical prowess was top of their class. He was arrogant, loud, and entirely convinced of his own destined greatness. Izuku, conversely, was quiet, observant, and intensely focused. He didn't boast about his quirk. He rarely used it in public, keeping his training relegated to secluded beaches and abandoned lots. To the casual observer, Izuku was just a nerdy kid who took too many notes and muttered to himself. But Katsuki knew better. Whenever they crossed paths in the hallway, Katsuki's eyes would narrow, tracking Izuku's movements. Katsuki remembered the hydro arrow. He remembered the feeling of his explosion bouncing off an immovable blue wall. He knew that beneath Izuku's polite, unassuming exterior was an arsenal waiting to be unleashed. Deku, Katsuki barked one afternoon as they were leaving the school gates. The sky was overcast, promising rain. Izuku paused, turning to face his rival. Yes, Kaken? UA applications are due next month, Katsuki said, stepping into Izuku's personal space. He smelled heavily of burnt caramel. I'm applying for the hero course. I'm going to ace the physical exam, get the highest score in history, and leave all these extras in the dust. I know, Izuku replied evenly, adjusting the strap of his yellow backpack. You've been saying that since we were 4. Katsuki's eye twitched at the calm response. He grabbed the collar of Izuku's uniform, pulling him close. I'm warning you. Don't get in my way. Don't think your little glass toys are going to steal my spotlight. I am going to be number 1. If you try to stand in front of me during that exam, I will shatter you. Izuku didn't blink. He looked down at Katsuki's hand gripping his shirt. He didn't summon a crystal. He didn't need to. He just met Katsuki's furious glare with a serene, unbothered calm. I'm not trying to steal your spotlight, Kaken, Izuku said softly, reaching up and firmly removing Katsuki's hand from his collar. His grip was shockingly strong, a testament to years of kendo and martial arts conditioning. I don't care about being flashy. I care about saving people. He took a step back, turning to walk away. And for the record, Izuku called over his shoulder, a hint of steel bleeding into his voice. Traptanium doesn't shatter unless I want it to. See you at the exam, Kaken. As Izuku walked home, the first drops of rain began to fall. He let the water hit his face, feeling the familiar, comforting resonance of the hydroelement humming beneath his skin. He was 14 years old. In 10 months, he would stand at the gates of UA High School. He would face the most grueling physical and mental test of his life. He would be competing against the most elite, powerful teenagers in the country. He didn't have immense, superhuman strength. He couldn't fly. He couldn't shoot lasers from his eyes. But as he raised his right hand, a small, perfectly cut sapphire blue crystal bloomed from his palm, spinning gracefully in the air. It caught the dim light of the street lamps, refracting it into a dazzling display of tactical potential. Izuku Midoriya didn't need to be the strongest. He just needed to be the smartest. He closed his hand, absorbing the crystal back into his skin. He was ready to spring the trap. The wind howling off the coast of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park carried the sharp, biting scent of salt and the heavy stench of rust. For years, the beach had been a dumping ground, a metallic graveyard of discarded appliances, crushed vehicles, and forgotten industrial waste. But to 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya, it was the perfect crucible. It was 5 a.m. on a freezing February morning. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun still struggling to crest the horizon. In the center of a cleared sandy arena, surrounded by towering mountains of scrap metal, Izuku stood with his eyes closed. His breath plumed in the frigid air, steady and rhythmic. He wore a simple gray tracksuit, drenched in sweat despite the cold. His body, once frail and unassuming, was now tightly coiled and packed with lean, functional muscle. The physical toll of his quirk demanded a vessel capable of withstanding extreme internal pressures and immense caloric depletion, and Izuku had spent the last 10 months forging exactly that. Focus, he told himself, tuning out the crash of the ocean waves. Fluidity is the key. Don't just summon, adapt. He snapped his eyes open. A rusted refrigerator, perched precariously on a pile of debris 20 yards away, shifted in the wind and began to tumble downward. Izuku didn't flinch. He thrust his right hand forward. The air around him dropped in temperature as a brilliant, blinding azure light bled through his skin. With a sound like shattering glass mixed with a crashing wave, a deep blue, crystalline broadsword materialized in his grasp. It was made of pure traptanium, humming with aquatic energy. He swung the blade in a wide upward arc. He didn't hit the refrigerator physically. Instead, a highly pressurized crescent of water erupted from the edge of the crystal sword. The hydroblade sliced through the freezing air and cleaved the falling refrigerator clean in half. The two heavy metal halves crashed harmlessly into the sand. But Izuku wasn't done. He immediately dropped the water blade. The moment it left his hand, it dissolved back into ambient blue energy. As he spun on his heel, anticipating an imaginary blind spot attack, his left hand flared with a violent, ruby-red light. Fire! The air warped with sudden, intense heat. A serrated, crimson traptanium dagger formed in his grip. He lunged at an old, battered pickup truck, plunging the dagger into the steel hood. The superheated crystal melted the metal on contact, carving a massive, glowing fissure through the engine block in a fraction of a second. Izuku withdrew the dagger, his chest heaving, the caloric drain immediately registering in his aching muscles. Using fire always took the most out of him. It was volatile, hungry, and aggressive, but he couldn't stop yet. He let the dagger dissipate, and slammed both hands onto the sandy ground. Earth. The light that erupted this time was a deep, opaque amber. The sand beneath him hardened instantly, crystallizing into a massive, jagged pillar that launched him 15 feet into the air. At the apex of his jump, he brought his hands together. A colossal, heavy traptanium hammer materialized. The sheer weight of it threatened to pull his arms out of their sockets, but his core tightened, perfectly balancing the weapon. With a feral yell, he brought the amber hammer down on the remains of the pickup truck. Crack boom! The impact was deafening. The truck didn't just dent. It crumpled into a flattened disk of scrap metal, the kinetic force of the earth-aligned traptanium transferring flawlessly through the steel. A shockwave of displaced sand rippled outward, washing over the beach. Izuku landed heavily, his boots sinking into the sand. The hammer vanished, shattering into a million tiny, glowing amber motes that slowly faded into the morning air. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath, clutching his stomach. His energy reserves were running on fumes. 9.4 seconds, a voice muttered from the dunes. Izuku looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Sitting on an overturned washing machine, holding a stopwatch, was Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki wasn't in his gym clothes. He wore his standard black middle school uniform, his posture relaxed but his crimson eyes sharp and analytical. They weren't training together. Katsuki's ego would never allow that. But over the past few months, Katsuki had occasionally shown up at the beach, silently observing Izuku's routines. It was a mutual, unspoken acknowledgement of their rivalry. Katsuki needed to know exactly what he was up against, and Izuku used Katsuki's intense scrutiny to push himself harder. Your transition from fire to earth was sloppy, Katsuki called out, hopping off the washing machine and kicking a piece of scrap metal out of his way. You lost momentum. In a real fight, a fast villain would have blitzed you while you were airborne. Izuku pushed himself up, pulling a high-calorie protein bar from his pocket, and tearing the wrapper off with his teeth. The earth hammer is dense, Kaken. It takes a larger stamina toll to manifest the traptanium at that specific volume. I had to ensure my center of gravity was stable before bringing it down, otherwise, the recoil would have shattered my forearms. Katsuki scoffed, shoving his hands into his pockets. Excuses, nerd. If you're too slow to swing the hammer, don't use the damn hammer. Stick to the water sword. It's faster. The water sword doesn't have the concussive force to break through heavy armor, Izuku countered, taking a massive bite of the protein bar to replenish his blood sugar. I need versatility. Katsuki smirked, a dangerous, confident grin. Versatility is for people who don't have enough raw power to end a fight in one hit. Doesn't matter how many shiny rocks you pull out of thin air, Deku. The exam is today. I'm going to get the highest score in the history of UA. You just try not to embarrass yourself. With that, Katsuki turned and began to walk away, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. I'll see you at the top, Kaken! Izuku called after him. Katsuki didn't look back, but he raised his right hand, a small, brilliant spark of an explosion popping from his palm in a silent acknowledgement. Izuku smiled, finishing his protein bar. The entrance exam was in exactly 3 hours. 10 years of study, 10 years of physical conditioning, and 10 years of mastering the volatile nature of his crystals had all led to this day. He looked down at his right hand. He clenched it into a fist, feeling the dormant, infinite potential of the traptanium thrumming in his veins. He was ready. The gates of UA High School were monolithic, towering arches of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. To Izuku, standing at the base of the steps leading up to the main campus, it felt like standing before the gates of Olympus. The sheer scale of the institution was meant to intimidate, to weed out those lacking conviction before they even took a step inside. Hundreds of teenagers were swarming the plaza, their faces a mixture of fierce determination and sheer panic. Izuku took a deep breath, mentally cataloging his internal stamina reserves. His mother had made him an enormous breakfast, katsudon, 3 eggs, and a massive protein shake. His body was fully fueled. His traptanium network was primed. Left foot, right foot, he thought, beginning his ascent. Out of my way, Deku. The familiar, gruff voice came from behind. Izuku stepped aside smoothly without breaking his stride, allowing Katsuki to march past him. The blonde boy emanated a palpable aura of intimidation, causing several other applicants to part like the Red Sea. Izuku chuckled softly to himself, but his amusement was cut short when a sudden, clumsy misstep caused his boot to catch on the edge of a concrete stair. His center of gravity pitched forward. His arms flailed as the hard stone steps rushed up to meet his face. Traptanium, air element, cushion. Izuku's mind raced, ready to summon a small pocket of pressurized wind to catch himself. But before the crystal could manifest, he suddenly stopped falling. He was hovering in midair, a few inches above the stairs, completely weightless. Are you okay? Izuku twisted around to see a girl with a round, cheerful face, large brown eyes, and a permanent rosy flush on her cheeks. She was holding her hands out, her fingertips pressed together, and she was looking at him with genuine concern. It's my quirk, zero gravity, she explained, a bright smile spreading across her face. She carefully pressed her hands together again, releasing the effect. Izuku dropped the remaining few inches to the stairs, catching his balance effortlessly. I stopped you with it. I hope you don't mind. It would be bad luck to fall right before the exam. Izuku's eyes widened, his analytical mind instantly whirring into motion. Gravity nullification? A 5-point contact activation? The tactical applications for rescue and heavy lifting are incredible. Thank you, Izuku said, bowing slightly. He didn't stutter, a testament to his newfound confidence. Your quirk is amazing. It's perfectly suited for disaster relief. The girl beamed, clearly taken aback by the immediate compliment. Oh wow, thanks. I'm Uraraka Achiko. I'm super nervous, but we're going to do our best, right? Midoriya Izuku, he replied with a warm smile. And yes, we are. Uraraka gave him a small wave before hurrying up the stairs, leaving Izuku with a renewed sense of excitement. He wasn't just here to fight robots. He was here to step into a world filled with amazing quirks and future heroes. The written portion of the exam was, to put it mildly, a breeze. For someone who had spent the last decade religiously studying hero laws, physics, quirk theory, and advanced mathematics to properly calculate the trajectory of his hydro arrows, the UE test was surprisingly straightforward. Izuku finished with 30 minutes to spare. Then came the orientation. The massive auditorium was pitch black until a lone spotlight snapped on, revealing the eccentric, loud, and unmistakable form of the voice hero, Present Mike. Welcome to my live show, everybody. Present Mike roared, his voice quirk echoing off the walls with enough force to rattle Izuku's teeth. Say hey, silence. Pure, awkward, terrified silence from the thousands of examinees. Izuku was practically vibrating in his seat. The voice hero. His directional sound manipulation is incredible. I wonder if my sound-based magic element crystals could mimic his frequencies? Present Mike didn't miss a beat. Tough crowd. No matter. Today, I'll be giving you the rundown on the practical exam. Are you ready? Yeah. A massive screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a video game-esque map of a sprawling urban cityscape. You'll be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles. Present Mike explained. You can bring whatever you want. After this presentation, you'll head to your assigned battle centers. Inside, there are 3 types of foe villains stationed throughout the city, each worth different points based on their difficulty level. Your goal is to use your quirks to rack up a high score. Izuku stared at the screen, analyzing the silhouettes of the robots. Standard treads, varying armor plating. A 1-pointer, a 2-pointer, and a 3-pointer. If they are completely robotic, my tech element is going to be devastating. Excuse me, sir. I have a question. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and neatly combed blue hair stood up near the front, his hand raised as straight as a board. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed. The boy then turned, his sharp gaze sweeping over the crowd until it landed squarely on a boy a few rows ahead of Izuku. And you, with the curly green hair. Izuku blinked. Me? You've been muttering this entire time. It's highly distracting. If you're treating this as a game, you should leave immediately. Izuku flushed slightly, realizing he had been audibly analyzing the robot's armor thickness. He rubbed the back of his neck, offering a polite but firm smile. My apologies. I was just formulating a tactical approach for the mechanized targets based on their chassis designs. I'll keep it down. The blue-haired boy seemed slightly taken aback by the logical, calm response, expecting a defensive outburst. He adjusted his glasses, nodding stiffly before sitting down. All right, examinee 7111, thanks for the segue. Present Mike shouted, cutting through the tension. The fourth villain type is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle, a massive gimmick that will rampage through tight spaces. If you see it, don't fight it. Just run. Izuku narrowed his eyes, staring at the massive silhouette of the 0-pointer. An obstacle that you're supposed to run from? In a hero exam? That doesn't make sense. Heroes don't run from obstacles when lives are on the line. There's a hidden metric here. There has to be. Battle Center B was a breathtaking feat of engineering. It was a perfect, life-sized replica of a bustling metropolis, complete with skyscrapers, alleyways, and paved roads. Izuku stood near the front of the massive crowd of applicants gathered before the colossal metal gates. He stretched his arms, feeling the cool air against his skin. He wore his custom-tailored dark green combat pants and a tight, black compression shirt designed to wick sweat and allow maximum mobility. He didn't wear armor. Traptanium provided all the armor he would ever need. He glanced around, spotting Uraraka a few yards away, looking incredibly pale and nervous. He considered walking over to reassure her, but he knew that once those doors opened, it was every man for himself. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice boomed from a speaker tower hidden on the wall. The examinees hesitated, waiting for a countdown. Izuku didn't. He knew there were no countdowns in real life. The moment President Mike spoke, Izuku lunged forward. The heavy metal doors were only just beginning to groan open, revealing a gap barely wide enough for a person. Izuku squeezed through before anyone else had even twitched. What are you waiting for? President Mike yelled. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The kid with the green hair has the right idea. The crowd erupted into a panic stampede, but Izuku was already half a block away. As he sprinted down the main avenue, his keen hearing picked up the heavy, mechanical grinding of gears from an intersecting alleyway. A 3-pointer rolled out of the shadows. It was a massive, tank-like machine with dual missile launchers mounted on its shoulders and a singular, glowing red optic sensor. Target acquired. The machine droned in a synthesized voice, swiveling its cannons toward Izuku. Izuku didn't break his stride. Distance, 30 yards. Target armor, heavy steel. Optimal element, earth. He raised his right hand. A blinding, golden amber light illuminated the shadowy street. With a sharp exhale, he summoned his earth-aligned weapon. Not the massive hammer, but a pair of brutal, jagged traptanium gauntlets that encased his fists and forearms in indestructible crystal armor. He didn't run at the robot. He used the environment. Izuku leaped onto the side of a nearby parked sedan, using it as a springboard. He launched himself into the air, soaring directly over the 3-pointer's incoming missile volley. As he fell toward the robot, he drew his right fist back. Shatter! Izuku yelled. His crystal-encased fist struck the central optic of the 3-pointer with the force of a wrecking ball. The traptanium easily bypassed the steel plating, crunching deep into the machine's internal circuitry. Sparks showered over Izuku as the robot seized, let out a mechanical groan, and collapsed into a smoking heap. 3 points, Izuku muttered, immediately dismissing the gauntlets. The amber crystal shattered into dust, saving his stamina. He took off running again. Over the next 5 minutes, Izuku became a ghost of destruction. He moved with a terrifying, calculated efficiency that left the other examinees staring in disbelief. He used his water blade to cleanly sever the treads of the fast-moving 1-pointers, leaving them immobilized for easy kills. He used his fire daggers to melt through the heavily armored joints of the 2-pointers, crippling them in seconds. He was at 45 points, and he hadn't even broken a sweat. But as he rounded a corner into a large plaza, he found himself facing a serious problem. 7 2-pointers and 3 3-pointers were converging on a small group of examinees, trapping them against a dead-end wall. Izuku could have easily engaged them with his earth hammer, but it would take too long, and the other examinees were in the line of fire. He needed a mass control tactic. It's time to test the theory, Izuku thought, a sharp grin crossing his face. Tech element. He dashed forward, sliding on his knees across the pavement to dodge a barrage of rubber bullets from a 2-pointer. He popped up directly underneath the mechanical beast. His right hand ignited, but not with blue, red, or amber light. This light was a piercing, synthetic neon orange. A perfectly geometric, intricate crystal spike formed in his grip. It looked less like a weapon and more like a massive, glowing flash drive. Izuku jammed the tech crystal directly into the underbelly of the two-pointer, right where its central processing unit was housed. The moment the traptanium pierced the metal, a surge of orange energy raced up the robot's chassis like lightning. The machine shuddered violently. Its singular red optic sensor flickered, static washing over the lens, before snapping back on. But it wasn't red anymore. It was glowing a bright, vibrant neon orange. Izuku stood up, leaving the crystal embedded in the machine. He didn't need to touch it. He could feel the connection in his mind, a flawless neurological link to the machine's operating system. Let's level the playing field, Izuku whispered. The hacked two-pointer abruptly spun around, turning its back on Izuku and the trapped examinees. It raised its pneumatic cannons and opened fire on its fellow robots. The resulting chaos was spectacular. The three-pointers, completely incapable of understanding why their ally had turned on them, hesitated for a crucial millisecond. The hacked robot unleashed a barrage of rapid-fire strikes, destroying 2 three-pointers and crippling 3 other machines before a lucky missile finally took it offline. The neon orange crystal dissolved, returning the energy to Izuku. He stood amidst the smoking wreckage, doing the math in his head. 45 plus the hack kills, that's roughly 65 points. I should be at the top of the leaderboard. He turned to the trapped examinees, who were staring at him with their jaws hanging open. Are you guys okay? The path is clear now. Without waiting for an answer, he darted back into the maze of the city. High above the mock city, in a dark observation room lined with monitors, the faculty of UA High School watched the carnage unfold in stunned silence. By the gods, Midnight breathed, leaning closer to one of the screens. Who is that kid in Battle Center B? Examinee 7111. Midoriya Izuku Nizu, the principal of UA, replied, taking a sip of his tea. His beady black eyes sparkled with immense interest. Quirk, Trap Team. A highly irregular emitter-class ability with shape-shifting and pseudo-summoning properties. Pseudo-summoning? Snipe, the masked sharpshooter, asked, adjusting his hat. Looks like pure weapon creation to me. He's swapping between elemental properties flawlessly. He's got the situational awareness of a seasoned pro. Wait, back up the footage on monitor 4, Power Loader, the support item specialist said, his voice tight with excitement. Did you see what he just did to that two-pointer? The screen rewound, showing Izuku plunging the orange crystal into the robot. He didn't destroy it, Power Loader gasped. He hijacked it. He created a localized, solid-state viral interface using that crystal, overrode the UA mainframe programming on a physical level, and commandeered the machine. That's impossible. Our firewalls are state-of-the-art. It seems his quirk bypasses standard digital firewalls by introducing a physical, elemental override, Knees amused, clapping his paws together in delight. Fascinating. Simply fascinating. He has brute strength, agility, and immense tactical utility. In the corner of the room, standing completely still, a gaunt, skeletal man with messy blonde hair watched the screen intently. Tashinori Yagi, All Might, felt a chill run down his spine. He had been looking for a successor, someone to inherit One for All. He had almost offered it to young Bakugo, whose score in Center A was currently tearing the roof off the charts. But looking at Midoriya Izuku, looking at the calm, heroic way he ensured the safety of the other applicants before dismantling the robots. This boy doesn't need my power, All Might thought, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He's already a force of nature. Well, they've had their fun, Nisa said, setting down his teacup. He reached toward a large, ominous red button on the console. Let's see how they handle true despair. Nisa pressed the button. Down in Battle Center B, the ground suddenly heaved. Izuku stumbled, nearly losing his footing as a localized earthquake rattled the pavement. The skyscrapers around him groaned in protest, windows shattering and raining glass down onto the streets. A shadow fell over the plaza, blocking out the sun. Izuku looked up, and for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. Bursting from the center of the city, tearing through two massive buildings as if they were made of cardboard, was the zero-pointer. It was titanic. It rolled forward on treads the size of houses, its massive metal fists easily crushing anything in its path. Its single, ominous red eye swept over the fleeing examinees like a predator observing ants. "It's the zero-pointer!" someone screamed. "Run!" The examinees didn't need to be told twice. A wave of panicked teenagers surged past Izuku, abandoning the exam in favor of saving their own lives. Izuku took a step back, his analytical mind calculating the variables. "It's too big. My elemental weapons are too localized to do significant damage to a chassis that thick. I have over 60 points. I'm safe. I should retreat." He turned to run, following the crowd. "I'll help. My leg is stuck." Izuku froze. The voice was faint, barely audible over the grinding gears of the colossal machine, but it was unmistakable. He whipped around, scanning the debris field left in the wake of the zero-pointer's entrance. There, trapped beneath a massive slab of fallen concrete, was Uraraka. The girl who had saved him from falling earlier was struggling desperately to free herself, but the rubble was far too heavy for her to lift, even with her gravity quirk, as she couldn't reach it properly, and the zero-pointer's massive treads were rolling directly toward her. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The other examinees were still running away, refusing to look back. Izuku didn't think. He didn't calculate stamina costs, or point totals, or the danger. He just moved. He sprinted toward the colossal machine, his legs pumping like pistons. "What is he doing?" an examinee shouted from a safe distance. "He's going to get crushed." Izuku ignored them. He closed his eyes as he ran, reaching deeper into his core than he ever had before. He bypassed the shallow pools of energy he used for his weapons and dove straight into the abyss of his physical reserves. He didn't need a weapon right now. He needed a miracle. He needed raw, unadulterated power, earth element. Maximum density. Trap Master Class. He skidded to a halt 10 yards away from Uraraka, placing himself directly in the path of the encroaching zero-pointer. He threw both of his hands forward, palms open, roaring as the caloric burn tore through his muscles like wildfire. Shatter! The eruption of light wasn't just bright, it was catastrophic. A blinding pillar of deep, impenetrable amber energy blasted into the sky, tearing up the pavement in a 50-foot radius. The sheer force of the manifestation pushed the zero-pointer back a fraction of an inch. From the pillar of light stepped the Titan. It was a massive, hulking construct, standing nearly 15 feet tall. Its body was entirely composed of heavily condensed, jagged amber traptanium. It possessed a broad, heavily armored torso, thick, pillar-like legs, and 2 arms that ended in hands the size of boulders. In each hand, the creature gripped an immense, double-sided crystalline hammer. It was the ultimate Earth Guardian. Izuku had named him Wallop. Wallop didn't roar. He simply stood like an immovable mountain between Uraraka and the zero-pointer. "Wallop, the debris!" Izuku screamed, his vision blurring from the intense stamina drain. The towering construct moved with surprising speed. It spun around, raising one of its colossal hammers, and brought it down on the massive slab of concrete trapping Uraraka. The precision was flawless. The concrete shattered into dust, leaving Uraraka completely unharmed. Uraraka scrambled backward, staring up at the amber giant in sheer awe. But the zero-pointer was still coming. It raised a metal fist the size of a bus, preparing to crush the crystal guardian into dust. "Not today!" Izuku yelled. He wasn't going to let his construct take the hit alone. Izuku pushed himself off the ground, jumping onto Wallop's massive, armored back. He ran up the guardian's spine, using the jagged crystal spikes as stepping stones. He leaped off Wallop's shoulders, propelling himself high into the air, directly toward the glowing red optic sensor of the zero-pointer. As he flew through the air, Izuku pulled back his right fist. He drew every last ounce of energy he had left, bypassing his safety limits. A localized, concentrated sphere of pure, blinding amber light formed over his hand. It wasn't just a gauntlet this time. It was a massive, perfectly formed traptanium sledgehammer, forged from his absolute willpower to protect. "Smayas!" Izuku roared, inadvertently echoing the battle cry of his idol. His strike connected squarely with the zero-pointer's red eye. The laws of physics screamed in protest. For a split second, everything was silent. Then, a massive shockwave of kinetic energy ripped outward, shattering the glass in every remaining building for a 3-block radius. The impenetrable traptanium hammer drove straight through the reinforced steel plating of the robot's face. The kinetic force traveled down the machine's spine, blowing out its internal circuitry, severing its hydraulic lines, and obliterating its core. The zero-pointer let out a distorted, dying electronic wail. Its massive chassis buckled, folding in on itself before the entire machine toppled backward, crashing onto the empty avenue in a massive plume of dust and fire. Izuku hung suspended in the air for a brief moment, the giant amber hammer evaporating into dust. His vision went completely black. The caloric deficit had caught up with him. He was falling, unconscious before he even began his descent. But he didn't hit the ground. Wallop stepped forward, reaching out with a massive, surprisingly gentle crystalline hand, and caught Izuku out of midair. The construct carefully lowered Izuku to the ground, laying him softly on a clear patch of pavement. The amber giant stood guard over Izuku for exactly 5 seconds, staring down the ruined avenue, ensuring no more threats remained. Then, its duty fulfilled, Wallop dissolved into a beautiful shower of golden light, fading away into the wind. Silence fell over Battle Center B. Uraraka crawled over to Izuku's unconscious form, her eyes wide with shock and tears. Midoriya? Midoriya! Time's up! Present Mick's voice echoed across the ruined city. The exam was over. Izuku woke up in the nurse's office, the smell of antiseptic violently jolting him out of a deep sleep. He shot up in bed, gasping, only to be immediately assaulted by a wave of intense nausea and muscle fatigue. He groaned, clutching his stomach. It felt like he hadn't eaten in a month. Easy there, Sonny, a gentle voice said. Izuku looked over to see an elderly woman in a nurse's uniform, her hair tied back in a bun, wielding a syringe shaped like a walking stick. Recovery girl. You completely depleted your glycogen stores, Recovery girl chided, handing him a massive tray stacked high with glucose tablets, protein bars, and a heavy, calorie-dense nutrient shake. Your quirk is incredibly taxing on your cellular energy. I accelerated your body's natural healing to fix some minor micro-tears in your muscles, but you need to eat this immediately, or you'll pass out again. Izuku didn't argue. He practically inhaled the food, the sugar and protein hitting his system like a jolt of electricity. As his vision cleared and the headache subsided, the reality of the situation crashed down on him. I passed out. I destroyed the zero-pointer, but it was worth 0 points. Did I get enough points beforehand? What if someone surpassed me while I was unconscious? He walked home that evening in a daze. His mother was ecstatic to see him, hovering over him and asking a million questions, but Izuku could only offer distracted answers. He retreated to his room, staring at the blank wall, running the numbers over and over in his head. The waiting period was agonizing. A week passed. Then 2. He continued his training at the beach, though he kept his quirk usage light, focusing on cardio and martial arts to let his traptanium reserves fully replenish. Katsuki hadn't spoken to him since the exam, a silence that Izuku found infinitely more nerve-wracking than the blonde's usual explosive taunts. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday evening, Inko Midoriya burst into Izuku's room, tears streaming down her face, holding a thick, wax-sealed envelope bearing the UA crest. Izuku! It's here! The letter is here! Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He took the envelope with trembling hands. It was surprisingly heavy. He sat at his desk, tearing the seal open. A small metal disc slipped out and clattered onto the desk. Before Izuku could inspect it, the disc whirred to life, projecting a high-definition hologram against his bedroom wall. I am here as a projection, Izuku gasped, pushing his chair back. It was All Might. The symbol of peace was wearing a bright yellow suit, pointing directly at the camera with a massive, blinding smile. Young Midoriya! All Might boomed. I know it's been a tense few weeks. I have been brought to UA High School as a teacher this year, and I must say, your performance in the practical exam was nothing short of breathtaking. The screen shifted, showing a scoreboard. You scored an impressive 65 villain points, showing remarkable combat proficiency and tactical genius. All Might continued. But wait! There is a hidden metric to the UA exam. A hero course that only rewards destruction is no hero course at all. The footage changed, showing a recording of Izuku leaping over Uraraka, summoning the massive amber construct, and obliterating the zero-pointer. How can we reject someone who puts their life on the line to save others, even when there is no reward? All Might's voice softened, filled with genuine pride. Rescue points. Bestowed by a panel of judges, Midoriya Izuku. For your selfless actions, you have been awarded 60 rescue points. The scoreboard updated. Izuku's name shot past everyone else's, resting firmly at the number 1 spot. Total score, 125 points. It was a new school record. You passed with flying colors, young man, All Might said, reaching out a hand as if to offer it through the projection. Come, Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The hologram clicked off, leaving the room in stunned silence. Izuku sat perfectly still. The tears he had been holding back for 10 years finally spilled over, trailing down his cheeks. He didn't sob, he just smiled, a quiet, unbreakable expression of pure triumph. The door opened behind him. Inko rushed in, wrapping her arms around him, weeping tears of joy into his shoulder. Izuku hugged his mother back tightly. He looked at his right hand, flexing his fingers. A tiny, microscopic spark of blue traptanium flickered on his fingertip, dancing like a firefly. He had forged his arsenal. He had shattered the obstacles in his path. Now, the real work was about to begin. The shrill, rhythmic blare of the alarm clock was instantly silenced by a palm encased in a thin layer of deep amber traptanium. Izuku Midoriya sat up in bed, letting the microscopic layer of earth-aligned crystal dissolve into harmless golden dust that faded before it even hit the mattress. It was 5:30 a.m. on a Monday, and the first golden rays of dawn were just beginning to peek through his bedroom window, illuminating the meticulously organized chaos of his hero analysis notebooks and quirk theory textbooks. He didn't feel tired. He felt an electric, thrumming anticipation coursing through his veins. Today was his first day at UA High School. He moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. 30 minutes of light calisthenics to get his blood flowing, followed by a scalding hot shower to loosen his muscles. He had to be careful with his body. The Trapteam quirk was a relentless taskmaster. If his physical conditioning lapsed, the sheer kinetic backlash of summoning a trap master or forging a heavy traptanium weapon could shatter his own bones. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled heavenly. Inko Midoriya was already at the stove, humming a cheerful tune as she plated a massive, calorie-dense breakfast. Over the years, she had adapted to Izuku's intense dietary needs. Where normal teenagers ate a bowl of rice and some fish, Izuku required an Olympic swimmer's caloric intake just to maintain his baseline stamina. Good morning, Izuku. Inko beamed, setting down a platter piled high with grilled salmon, an oversized mound of rice, 3 eggs, and a large protein shake. Did you sleep well? Like a log, Mom, Izuku smiled, pulling out his chair and immediately digging in. Though I admit, I kept waking up thinking I dreamed the acceptance letter. Being the number 1 scorer, it still hasn't fully sunk in. Inko reached out, gently wiping a stray grain of rice from his cheek. It wasn't a dream, sweetie. You earned every single point. You worked harder than anyone else. I am so proud of you. Her eyes grew misty, but she quickly blinked the tears away, offering a watery smile. Now eat up. You don't want to be running on fumes on your first day. Izuku nodded, focusing on the food. He mentally calculated his macronutrients. Protein for muscle repair, complex carbohydrates for sustained energy release, and the shake for immediate glucose availability. If the orientation involves any physical testing, I need my lipid reserves fully stocked. Traptanium pulls from my core energy. If I tap out, the crystals become brittle. By the time he finished breakfast, donned his brand new UA uniform, the dark blazer and red tie feeling like a suit of armor, and strapped his customized tactical utility belt, hidden beneath the blazer and stocked with high-calorie nutrient bars around his waist, it was time to go. Standing at the front door, he slipped his feet into his signature red boots. Izuku, Inko called softly from the hallway. He turned. She was holding her hands clasped to her chest, her expression a mix of maternal anxiety and overwhelming pride. Be safe. And have a wonderful first day. Izuku offered a smile that radiated quiet confidence. I will, Mom. I promise. The hallways of UA High School were a labyrinth of polished floors, massive windows, and doors large enough to accommodate students with gigantification quirks. Izuku navigated the corridors with his hands in his pockets, his sharp emerald eyes taking in every architectural detail. Reinforced load-bearing pillars. The glass on the windows is polycarbonate, likely bulletproof and shatter-resistant. The floors have a high-traction coating. This whole building is designed to withstand internal quirk usage. He finally stopped in front of a colossal door labeled 1A. Izuku took a deep breath, centering himself. He was the top scorer, but that didn't mean he could let his guard down. He reached out and slid the massive door open. The first thing he saw was Katsuki Bakugo. The blonde boy was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up disrespectfully on the desk. Standing over him, chopping his arms in a rigid, robotic motion, was the tall, blue-haired boy from the orientation auditorium. "Remove your feet from the desk this instant," the blue-haired boy demanded, his voice ringing with authoritative indignation. "It is an insult to the upperclassmen who sat there before us, and an insult to the craftsman who made the desk." "Like I care," Katsuki sneered, a tiny spark of an explosion popping off his thumb. "What middle school are you from, you stick-in-the-mud extra?" "I am from Semi-Private Academy." "My name is Ida Tenya." "Semi, huh? So you're an elite." Katsuki's signature feral grin spread across his face. "I'm going to have fun crushing you," Ida gasped, taking a step back. "Crushing me? You truly wish to be a hero with an attitude like that?" Before Katsuki could retort, his crimson eyes snapped to the doorway. He spotted Izuku. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a dark, intense scowl. The entire classroom fell silent as Ida turned to follow Katsuki's gaze. "Ah!" Ida straightened his posture, marching briskly toward the door. You are the green-haired student who realized there was a hidden metric in the practical exam." Izuku stepped into the room, holding his hands up defensively, though his posture remained relaxed. "I just made a tactical assumption based on the parameters of the test. I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's nice to meet you, Ida." "Tenya Ida," the boy introduced himself again, bowing perfectly at a 90-degree angle. "I must apologize. I misjudged you during the orientation. You correctly deduced the true nature of the exam while the rest of us were blinded by the points system. And you saved another examinee in the process. I concede, you are better suited for UA than I am." "There's no need for that," Izuku chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're all starting from the same line today, Deku." Katsuki's voice cut through the polite exchange like a serrated knife. He didn't yell. The low, dangerously quiet tone was much worse. He slowly swung his legs off the desk, his eyes burning holes into Izuku. "You think you're the king of the castle because you got some pity points for crushing a rusted toy?" Katsuki stood up, the air around him smelling faintly of burned sugar. "I don't care what the scoreboard said. I killed more villains than you. I am stronger than you. Don't you ever forget that." Izuku met Katsuki's gaze without flinching. 10 years ago, he would have curled into a ball. Now, he simply catalogued the tension in Katsuki's shoulders. "I didn't get pity points, Kaken," Izuku replied evenly, the calmness in his voice only serving to infuriate the blonde further. "I secured the objective. We just prioritized different strategies." "Midoriya! You made it!" The heavy tension was instantly shattered by a bright, cheerful voice. Uraraka Achiko pushed past Ida, her face breaking into a massive smile. "I was hoping we'd be in the same class. I wanted to properly thank you for saving me. That giant rock monster you made was incredible. It was like... bam! And then you jumped, and it was like SMASH. Uraraka accompanied her sound effects with wild, enthusiastic martial arts poses. Izuku couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, warm sound that made Katsuki click his tongue in disgust and look away. "It was nothing, Uraraka. I'm just glad you weren't hurt," Izuku smiled. "If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave." The voice was muffled, dry, and came from the floor. The 3 students looked down. Lying in the corridor, encased in a bright yellow sleeping bag that looked suspiciously like a giant caterpillar, was a scruffy, exhausted-looking man. Before anyone could react, the man unzipped the sleeping bag, revealing an all-black uniform and a gray scarf wrapped around his neck. He pulled a juice pouch from his pocket and took a long sip. It took you lot 8 seconds to quiet down, the man drawled, stepping into the classroom and walking to the podium. Time is a precious resource. You kids aren't rational enough. The class scrambled to their seats, realizing with mounting horror that this unkempt man was their homeroom teacher. I'm Aizawa Shota. I'll be your homeroom teacher, he announced bluntly. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a stack of blue and white tracksuits. Put these on and head out to the PE grounds. We're doing a quirk apprehension test. The morning sun beat down on the sprawling, immaculate dirt field of the UA physical education grounds. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in their gym uniforms, shivering not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of their teacher's aura. A quirk apprehension test? The class echoed in unison, save for Izuku, Todoroki, and Bakugo. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked, her voice laced with worry. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for leisurely events, Aizawa said, his back turned to them. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That also applies to how the teachers run their classes. You've been doing these tests since junior high, right? Pitching, long jump, grip strength. But without your quirks, the country still uses averages taken from results devoid of quirks. It's not rational. The Ministry of Education is procrastinating. Aizawa turned his tired, bloodshot eyes toward the students. His gaze swept over the class, pausing for a fraction of a second on Izuku before settling on Bakugo. Bakugo. You finished first in the practical exam in terms of raw villain kills, correct? Katsuki crossed his arms, looking smug. Yeah. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Katsuki answered. Try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed a baseball to him and pointed to a chalk circle painted on the dirt. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay in the circle. Hurry up. Give it all you've got. Katsuki cracked his neck, stepping into the circle. He stretched his right arm, his crimson eyes narrowing. I'll show them. I'll show that nerd Deku that his little parlor tricks mean nothing. He wound up, his muscles coiling. As his arm snapped forward, he released a devastating explosion from his palm, launching the ball with a deafening roar. Die! Katsuki bellowed. The ball shot into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke before vanishing into the distance. Aizawa held up a digital device. It beeped. He turned the screen around to face the class. 705.2 meters. The class erupted into a chorus of gasps and excited murmurs. Over 700 meters? That's insane! A boy with electric yellow hair yelled. This looks like so much fun. A pink-skinned girl cheered. We get to use our quirks as much as we want. Izuku didn't cheer. He stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Aizawa. He saw the subtle tightening of the teacher's jaw, the slight narrowing of those exhausted eyes. He's trying to gauge our psychological profiles, Izuku deduced rapidly. He's testing our compliance, our creativity, and our drive. Whoever treats this like a game is going to be punished. Fun, you say? Aizawa's voice dropped to a menacing, raspy register. The temperature on the field seemed to plummet. You have 3 years to become heroes. Are you going to have an attitude like that the whole time? Aizawa smiled. It was a terrifying, feral expression. All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 events will be judged as having no potential, and will be expelled. Panic instantly rippled through the class. Expelled? But it's the first day. Uraraka protested. That's completely unfair. Natural disasters, massive accidents, and selfish villains. Calamities whose time or place cannot be predicted, Aizawa replied coldly, his gaze locking onto Uraraka. Japan is covered with unfairness. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go hang out with your friends at a normal high school, too bad. For the next 3 years, you will throw hardship after hardship at you. Go plus ultra. Overcome it with all you've got. Aizawa pulled his scarf tighter around his neck. Now, the demonstration is over. The real thing starts now. Izuku reached into his tracksuit pocket, his fingers brushing against the foil wrapper of a high-calorie nutrient bar. 8 events. I need to ration my traptanium usage carefully. If I burn out early, my scores will plummet in the later tests. Aizawa stood off to the side, his clipboard in hand. Beneath his bored exterior, his mind was razor-sharp. He had read the files of every student. Bakugo was a powerhouse of raw talent. Todoroki was a prodigy of immense pedigree. But the file that fascinated Aizawa the most was Midoriya Izuku's quirk, trap team. Emitter/summoning. Aizawa had watched the footage of the zero-pointer. He had seen the massive amber construct. He wanted to see how the boy handled micro-level applications. Was he a one-trick pony relying on massive, stamina-draining moves, or did he possess true tactical control? Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku found himself lining up against Ida. I wish you luck, Midoriya, Ida said, stretching his calves, where large exhaust pipes protruded from the skin. Though in a test of pure speed, I must warn you, my engine quirk is unparalleled. Izuku smiled politely. I'm looking forward to seeing it, Ida. Izuku stepped up to the starting line. He needed a fast time, but he couldn't afford a massive expenditure of energy. The water construct was fast, but summoning a sentient being for a 50-meter dash was overkill. He needed mobility, air element. Low density, high velocity. Izuku closed his eyes. The ambient air around him began to swirl, picking up dust from the track. A brilliant, ethereal white light began to glow from the soles of his boots. On your marks. A robotic voice called from the tracking camera. The white light intensified, crystallizing into a pair of sleek, aerodynamic traptanium hover skates strapped directly to his boots. They weren't solid metal. They were composed of solidified, highly pressurized wind. Get set. Izuku crouched low, his center of gravity perfectly balanced. Go! Ida exploded off the starting line with a roar of engines, a blur of blue and white. But Izuku didn't run. He leaned forward. The air traptanium skates detonated with a concentrated burst of wind pressure, propelling Izuku forward at a staggering velocity. He skimmed less than an inch above the dirt, frictionless and hyperaerodynamic. He manipulated the wind currents to eliminate drag, moving like a bullet fired from a silencer. He crossed the finish line in a flash of white light, immediately dismissing the skates to avoid crashing into the safety nets. He hit the ground running to bleed off his momentum. 3.04 seconds, the robotic voice announced for Ida. 3.12 seconds, it announced for Izuku. Ida panted, his engines cooling down, staring at Izuku in disbelief. Incredible! You matched my engine quirk with crystallized wind? The versatility of your quirk is astounding. Izuku pulled a nutrient bar from his pocket and took a small bite. It's just basic aerodynamics, Ida. If the track were 100 meters, your top speed would have left me in the dust. I just had better initial acceleration. Aizawa marked his clipboard. Resourceful. He didn't use the massive rock construct. He created a highly specific, low-energy mobility tool. He understands his own limits. Test 2, grip strength. Izuku stood next to a multi-armed student named Shoji, who had just crushed the machine with a score of 540 kilograms. Izuku looked at the small metal device in his hand. If he squeezed it normally, he'd score average for a fit teenager. He needed an edge, earth element. Maximum localized density. Izuku activated his quirk. A small, concentrated patch of amber light formed exclusively over his right hand. Instead of summoning a massive gauntlet, he created an ultra-dense, microscopic layer of earth traptanium that acted like a mechanical vice over his fingers. He applied the kinetic pressure through the crystal, not his muscles. The machine shrieked under the immense pressure. Izuku let go before the metal casing snapped. The screen read 480 kilograms. Test 3, standing long jump. Izuku waited for his turn, watching Katsuki clear the sandbox using his explosions to fly. When Izuku stepped up, he didn't use air again. He needed to vary his elemental usage to prevent a localized mana burn in his system. He slammed his heel into the dirt. A small, explosive pillar of amber earth traptanium erupted directly beneath him, launching him over the sandbox entirely like a human cannonball. He landed softly on the grass, the pillar dissolving behind him. The test continued. Izuku utilized his quirk with surgical precision. For the sustained sidesteps, he used small pads of water traptanium on his soles to slide frictionlessly back and forth, beating everyone except a tiny boy with sticky purple balls on his head. By the time the final event arrived, Izuku was breathing heavily. His muscles ached, and his forehead was beaded with sweat. He had consumed 3 nutrient bars, but his lipid reserves were dipping dangerously low. Test 8, Softball Throw. Uraraka stepped into the circle. With a soft tap to the ball, she negated its gravity and threw it. It sailed into the sky, never coming down. Aizawa showed the screen. An infinity symbol. Infinity? The class screamed. Izuku smiled, analyzing the trajectory. Incredible. Absolute nullification of gravitational mass. The applications are endless. Midoriya. You're up, Aizawa called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. Izuku stepped into the chalk circle, the soft ball resting heavy in his hand. He looked out over the massive expanse of the field. He was tired. His earth and air elements were tapped out for the moment. If he tried to summon a massive construct to throw the ball, the recoil would likely tear a muscle. He needed something explosive, something that provided maximum kinetic output for minimal physical exertion. Fire element. It's aggressive. It's hard to control, but it packs a punch. Izuku closed his eyes, centering his breathing. He extended his right arm, holding the ball out. A deep, violent ruby-red light began to bleed through the skin of his forearm. In the crowd, Katsuki narrowed his eyes. That's the red light. The fire element. He used that to melt a car in training. What the hell is he going to do with a baseball? Aizawa watched closely. He reached up, his fingers brushing the fabric of his capture scarf. His eyes remained locked on Izuku. He didn't activate his quirk to erase Izuku's, but he prepared to intervene if the boy lost control. He wanted to see how the trap team quirk generated raw power. Izuku's right arm was entirely encased in a glowing, jagged casing of red crystal. But he wasn't making a sword. He was shaping it into a hollow cylinder, a makeshift cannon barrel that encased his arm up to the elbow, with the softball loaded at the base of his palm. Izuku gritted his teeth, feeling the intense, searing heat of the fire traptanium. Compress the thermal energy at the base. Build the pressure. Do not let the heat bleed out into the atmosphere. He aimed his arm at the sky at a 45-degree angle. Ignite! Izuku shouted. He triggered a massive, localized thermal detonation inside the base of the crystal barrel. Because the traptanium was indestructible, the explosive force had nowhere to go but forward. Boom! A deafening shockwave ripped across the field. A massive ring of fire and pressurized smoke erupted from the end of Izuku's arm cannon. The softball was launched at a hypersonic velocity, leaving a visible red contrail in the sky as it vanished from sight in the blink of an eye. The recoil was immense. Izuku was thrown backward, his boots sliding through the dirt. The red crystal shattered instantly, dissipating into harmless motes of light as Izuku collapsed onto one knee, clutching his smoking right arm. His muscles were screaming, completely drained. Aizawa looked at his digital device. The numbers climbed rapidly before settling. He turned the screen to the class. 706.1 meters. Silence reigned over the field for a solid 5 seconds. He beat Bakugo by less than a meter? The yellow-haired boy Kaminari yelled, grabbing his head. He built a freaking bazooka out of his arm. Katsuki stood frozen. His jaw was slack, his crimson eyes wide with a mixture of shock and unadulterated fury. 706.1. He beat me. That quirkless, useless Deku beat me. Katsuki's hands ignited with massive, volatile explosions. He didn't think, he just reacted. He lunged forward, sprinting straight for the exhausted Izuku. Deku, you bastard! Katsuki roared. Tell me how you did that. Tell me right now. Izuku looked up, still on one knee, too drained to summon a shield in time. Suddenly, a gray cloth shot out like a viper, wrapping around Katsuki's torso and arms, binding him tight. Katsuki's explosion sputtered and died instantly. What the? This cloth is stiff. Katsuki struggled, his eyes darting to Aizawa. Aizawa's eyes were glowing a brilliant, terrifying red, his hair floating wildly in the air around him. They're weapons designed for capture woven from carbon fibers and a special metal alloy. Stop using your quirk, Bakugo. You're giving me dry eye. Aizawa blinked, his hair falling flat. He retracted the scarf, releasing Katsuki, who stood there seething, glaring daggers at Izuku. "We're wasting time," Aizawa sighed, walking back toward the building. "Whoever's done, look at your results." A massive hologram projected from Aizawa's device. Izuku scanned the list. 1. Yayoro Zumomo. 2. Todoroki Shoto. 3. Midoriya Izuku. 4. Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku let out a long, shuddering breath. He had secured third place. He was safe. "By the way, I lied about the expulsion," Aizawa called over his shoulder, not even looking back. "It was a rational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks." The class, minus a very smug Yayorozu, screamed in collective outrage. Izuku just chuckled, slowly pushing himself to his feet. He pulled his last nutrient bar from his belt, tearing it open. A rational deception. Right. If anyone had actually slacked off, he absolutely would have expelled them. Yui isn't playing around. He caught Katsuki's gaze across the field. The blonde boy wasn't screaming anymore. He was staring at Izuku with a cold, calculating fury that promised violence. The battle lines were drawn. The next afternoon, the atmosphere in Class 1A was entirely different. The grueling physical tests of Aizawa's homeroom had been replaced by the electric anticipation of foundational hero studies. The door burst open with the force of a hurricane. Coming through the door like a normal person, All Might stood in the doorway, striking a pose in his Silver Age costume. The class erupted into cheers, completely starstruck by the presence of the number one hero. Izuku sat in his chair, his notebook already out, scribbling furiously. The Silver Age costume. It emphasizes his muscular definition to project an image of absolute power. The aerodynamic cape is a classic touch. To see it in person. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. All Might boomed, marching to the podium. Think of it as Heroing 101. Here you will learn the basics of being a pro. And what is a hero without their signature look? All Might pointed to the wall, where several rows of mechanical panels slid open, revealing numbered, heavy-duty briefcases. Costumes made based on your quirk registrations and requests you sent in before school started. All Might announced. Get changed, and gather at Ground Beta. Ground Beta was another mock cityscape, though older and more compact than the one used for the entrance exam. As the students filed out of the tunnel, All Might stood waiting, his hands on his hips. They say the clothes make the man, young men and ladies. Be fully aware, from now on, you are heroes. Izuku stepped out of the tunnel, adjusting the straps on his chest. His hero costume was a stark departure from the bright, flashy spandex of many of his peers. It was designed for maximum tactical utility and minimal quirk interference. He wore a dark, forest green combat suit made from a lightweight, fire-resistant, and cut-resistant polymer. The suit was sleeveless, allowing for the unimpeded generation of traptanium from his arms and shoulders, where he typically anchored his heavier weapons. His forearms and shins were wrapped in black, flexible compression bandages. His utility belt was heavy and extensive, featuring multiple pouches specifically lined with thermal insulation to carry high-calorie nutrient bars without them melting or freezing. Strapped to his back was a slim, aerodynamic hydration pack filled with an electrolyte and glucose solution. The most prominent feature, however, was the crystalline motif. Down the sides of his torso and along the trim of his boots were faint, iridescent blue geometric patterns that subtly caught the light, an homage to the element that first awakened his dream. He didn't wear a full mask. He had a metallic guard that covered his jaw and a dark green visor resting on his forehead, which he could pull down to protect his eyes from the blinding flash of his own crystal manifestations. Midoriya! Uraraka jogged over, her pink and black spacesuit looking heavily padded. Your costume looks so cool. It's very tactical. Thanks, Uraraka. Izuku smiled, securing his visor. Yours looks great too. The skin-tight design probably helps negate any loose clothing getting caught when you manipulate your own gravity. Exactly. She beamed, rubbing the back of her neck in mild embarrassment. Though I should have written what I wanted more specifically. It's a bit tighter than I expected. Now that you're all here, it's time for the battle trial. All Might announced. He explained the rules. The class would be divided into teams of 2. One team would play the villains, guarding a nuclear weapon hidden inside a multi-story building. The other team would play the heroes, tasked with either capturing the villains or touching the weapon within a 15-minute time limit. Lots were drawn. Izuku looked at the black ball in his hand. Team A. He looked around. Who else is Team A? I am. Uraraka cheered, holding up her matching ball. We're a team, Midoriya. This is gonna be great. Yeah, Izuku nodded, his mind already formulating basic breach and clear tactics. We have good synergy. Your gravity nullification and my mobility, and your opponents will be. All Might pulled 2 white balls from another box. Team D, Izuku froze. Standing across the group, holding a white ball, was Tenya Ida. And standing next to him, his face shadowed by the massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms, was Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki looked up. His eyes locked onto Izuku. The terrifying, feral grin returned, wider and more unhinged than ever. Team D are the villains. Team A are the heroes. Well, Izuku murmured, a cold, hyper-focused calm washing over him. The ambient air around him seemed to drop in temperature. This is going to be interesting. Inside the dimly lit, labyrinthine corridors of the mock building, the villains were preparing. On the 5th floor, a massive, papier-mâché missile sat in the center of a large room. Ida paced back and forth, completely immersed in his role. So, we must protect this payload at all costs. A true villain would use the environment to their advantage. Bakugo, I suggest we fortify this room and wait for them to come to us. Katsuki ignored him. He was standing by the door, staring down the dark hallway, his hands twitching at his sides. Bakugo, did you hear me? Ida asked, adjusting his glasses. Shut up, Four Eyes, Katsuki growled, not looking back. You guard the bomb. I'm going hunting. What? No, that violates our defensive strategy. Ida protested. Midoriya is highly analytical. If you rush him blindly, you fall into his pace. Katsuki finally turned around, his red eyes blazing with an intensity that made Ida take a step back. You think I don't know that? I know exactly how that damn nerd fights. He analyzes, he plots, and he pulls cheap parlor tricks out of thin air. He thinks he can outsmart me. Katsuki cracked his knuckles, the grenade pins on his gauntlets clinking softly. I'm not going to give him the time to think. I'm going to blow his stupid crystals into dust, and I'm going to remind him where he belongs. Without another word, Katsuki stalked out of the room, heading for the stairwell. Outside the building, Izuku and Uraraka stood looking at a blueprint of the facility on a digital tablet. So, what's the plan? Uraraka asked, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. You know Bakugo better than anyone. Is he going to wait for us? No, Izuku answered instantly, his eyes scanning the blueprint. Kaken's pride won't allow him to sit on defense. He wants to prove he's better than me. He's going to leave Ida to guard the weapon, and he's going to come straight for us the second the buzzer sounds. Uraraka gulped. Straight for us? Like an ambush? Exactly, Izuku nodded, tracing a path on the tablet. He knows I prefer to set up my tactics from a distance. So he's going to try and close the gap immediately. We can't fight him in a narrow hallway. His explosions will take up the entire corridor, and the shockwaves will concuss us. Izuku looked at Uraraka, his green eyes burning with a fierce, tactical light. We aren't going to fight him head-on, Uraraka. We're going to set a snare. A snare? My quirk is called Trap Team for a reason, Izuku explained, pulling a high-calorie bar from his pouch and eating it in 2 quick bites. When we enter the building, I want you to head for the stairwell on the east side and go straight up to the 5th floor. Ida will be there. Try to distract him. What about you? Uraraka asked. I'll take the main corridor. I'll make a lot of noise. I'll draw Kaken to me. Izuku pulled his visor down over his eyes. And then I'll show him what happens when you rush blindly into a minefield. A loud buzzer echoed across the training ground. Hero team, you may enter. All Might's voice boomed from the speakers. Izuku and Uraraka slipped through a window on the 1st floor, dropping silently into a dark, dusty hallway. Good luck, Midoriya, Uraraka whispered, immediately breaking off toward the east wing. Izuku was alone. The air was thick and silent. He walked down the center of the main corridor, his footsteps intentionally heavy. He wasn't trying to hide. He was the bait. As he walked, his hands glowed with a faint, pulsing azure light. He dragged his fingers along the walls, leaving microscopic, invisible traces of water-aligned traptanium embedded in the plaster. He reached a large, open intersection in the center of the first floor. 3, 2, 1. From around the corner to his left, Katsuki burst into view, propelled by a massive explosion from his right hand. He moved with terrifying speed, clearing the distance between them in a fraction of a second. DKU! Katsuki roared, pulling back his left arm, aiming a sweeping hook right at Izuku's head. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't summon a shield or a weapon, he simply snapped his fingers. The microscopic traces of blue traptanium he had left on the ceiling directly above Katsuki violently reacted to the kinetic shift. Shatter! A massive, pressurized geyser of water erupted straight down from the ceiling, completely dousing Katsuki. But this wasn't ordinary water. It was hypercondensed traptanium fluid. The moment it hit Katsuki, it hardened, crystallizing into thick, heavy blue bands that pinned his arms to his sides and anchored his boots to the floor. Katsuki's forward momentum was instantly halted. He crashed face first into the concrete floor, bound tight by the water snare. Izuku stood 5 feet away, his hands resting on his belt. A direct rush attack. Just like I thought, Kaken. You bastard! Katsuki thrashed wildly against the crystal bands on the floor. His hands were trapped near his chest, but they began to glow orange. The heat from his palms started to boil the water crystal, steam rising rapidly into the hallway. You think a little water is going to hold me? Boom! Katsuki ignited a point-blank explosion against his own chest, the sheer kinetic force shattering the crystallized water. He staggered to his feet, dripping wet and coughing from the smoke, his eyes wide with manic fury. Izuku was already moving. He didn't stay to fight. He sprinted down the corridor to his right, heading deeper into the building. Get back here, you coward! Katsuki yelled, launching himself after Izuku with a series of rapid-fire explosions. In the monitor room, the rest of Class 1A watched in stunned silence. Midoriya completely predicted Bakugo's ambush, Yaoyorozu noted, her eyes wide. He intentionally created a choke point and trapped him without even throwing a punch. But Bakugo broke out easily, Kirishima pointed out, leaning closer to the screen. And now Midoriya is running away. If Bakugo catches him in a straight sprint, it's over. All Might watched the screen, his arms crossed. You aren't running away, are you, young Midoriya? You're leading him. Back in the building, Izuku vaulted over a pile of debris, darting into a large, open room with several concrete pillars. Katsuki blasted through the doorway seconds later, completely blinded by rage. I'll melt your stupid crystals into slag. Katsuki aimed his massive right gauntlet at Izuku. The pin was drawn. Izuku stopped dead in the center of the room. He didn't dodge. Instead, he slammed his right hand onto the floor. This time, the light wasn't blue, and it wasn't amber. It was a piercing, vibrant neon orange. Tech element. Conductor matrix. A web of glowing orange geometric lines spread rapidly across the floor from Izuku's palm, racing toward Katsuki like digital lightning. Katsuki, completely focused on aiming his gauntlet, didn't notice the floor lighting up beneath him until it was too late. The orange lines converged directly under Katsuki's boots. Zap! A localized, non-lethal, high-voltage electrical stun trap triggered from the tech traptanium. A blinding flash of synthetic lightning surged upward, bypassing Katsuki's thick boots and striking his nervous system. Katsuki convulsed, a pained grunt escaping his lips. His muscles locked up entirely. His right arm, aimed squarely at Izuku, jerked wildly off target. The massive explosion fired from his gauntlet, but instead of hitting Izuku, it tore through the ceiling, obliterating the concrete and sending shockwaves rattling through the entire building. Izuku stood up, letting the orange matrix fade. He was breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his face. The tech element traps were incredibly precise but cost a massive amount of stamina to execute flawlessly. Katsuki fell to one knee, panting, his body twitching slightly from the residual electrical shock. He glared up at Izuku through the smoke and dust. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was realizing that he was being played. You! Katsuki wheezed, forcing himself to stand. You're not even trying to fight me. You're just swatting me away. I am fighting you, Kaken, Izuku said softly. But I'm not going to fight you on your terms. I can't outpunch your explosions. So I have to outthink them. Katsuki's face contorted into a mask of pure, humiliated rage. Stop analyzing me. Stop looking down on me. Katsuki launched himself again, but this time, he didn't use a massive explosion. He used small, rapid bursts to maneuver erratically around the pillars, making himself impossible to track. He closed the distance, popping up directly in Izuku's blind spot. A right hook aimed for Izuku's ribs. Izuku's left hand flashed red. A short, thick fire traptanium dagger materialized, intercepting Katsuki's wrist. The superheated edge didn't cut Katsuki, but the intense, localized heat forced Katsuki to pull his punch back with a hiss of pain. Izuku immediately dropped the dagger, pivoting on his right foot. His right hand flared amber. A heavy earth buckler formed on his forearm just in time to block Katsuki's explosive left cross. Bang! The force of the explosion against the earth shield sent Izuku sliding back several feet, his boots leaving dark streaks on the floor. He dropped the shield, his arms trembling from the kinetic recoil. The fight devolved into a brutal, high-speed game of chess. Katsuki attacked with ferocious, unpredictable speed, unleashing barrages of close-quarters explosions. Izuku never went on the offensive. He stayed entirely defensive, his hands flashing in a kaleidoscope of colors. Blue to deflect a blast. Amber to absorb a heavy blow. Orange to sabotage the environment. Red to parry a strike. He was burning through his stamina at an alarming rate, but his eyes never lost their sharp, analytical focus. Uraraka. Izuku thought, parrying another explosive kick with a water blade. I can't hold him forever. Tell me you're there. Suddenly, his earpiece crackled to life. Midoriya! I'm on the 5th floor. Ida has removed all the items in the room, so I can't use them as projectiles. He's too fast, I can't touch him. Izuku ducked under a sweeping blast from Katsuki, sweeping a leg out to force the blonde back. Uraraka, listen to me, Izuku said into his comms, his voice strained. The building's structural integrity on the east side is weakened from Kaken's stray blasts. Grab onto a pillar near the wall, and wait for my signal. Right, Katsuki roared, charging forward with both hands glowing ominously. Who are you talking to? Look at me, Deku! I'm looking right at you, Kaken, Izuku said. Izuku didn't block this time. He raised both hands, pulling from the absolute bottom of his energy reserves. He activated 2 elements simultaneously, a dangerous feat he had rarely practiced. His right hand glowed deep amber. His left hand glowed brilliant azure, earth and water. Mudslide. Izuku slammed both hands onto the ground. The concrete floor beneath Katsuki rippled and liquefied. The earth traptanium broke the molecular bonds of the floor, while the water traptanium flooded the porous material. In an instant, the solid floor turned into a localized pit of thick, hyperdense, crystalline quicksand. Katsuki sank up to his waist before he could even register what had happened. The mud instantly resolidified, turning back into impenetrable stone, locking his legs in a vice-like grip. Katsuki was completely immobilized, but Izuku wasn't done. He looked up at the ceiling. Now, Uraraka! Izuku shouted into the comms. Izuku thrust his right hand upward. A massive, jagged spire of earth traptanium erupted from his palm, shooting straight up like a missile. It punched completely through the ceiling, piercing through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors. On the 5th floor, Ida was confidently monologuing to Uraraka. Suddenly, the massive amber spire erupted from the floorboards, tearing through the room like a localized earthquake. The shockwave knocked Ida entirely off his feet, sending him tumbling away from the weapon. Uraraka, holding onto the pillar as instructed, immediately released her grip. She tapped her boots, nullifying her gravity, and floated directly over the tumbling Ida, landing softly on top of the papier-mâché missile. She wrapped her arms around it. Secure. A loud, piercing buzzer sounded throughout the facility. Hero team wins. All Might's voice echoed through the speakers, slightly distorted by static, but filled with undeniable excitement. Izuku let out a long, ragged exhale. The amber spire shattered, crumbling into dust. The stone gripping Katsuki's legs dissolved, dropping the blond boy unceremoniously onto the floor. Izuku collapsed onto his back, staring up at the hole he had blasted in the ceiling. He was utterly tapped out. He couldn't even summon a spark. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the sound of both boys' heavy breathing. Katsuki sat on the floor, staring at his hands. He hadn't landed a single clean hit. He had used his strongest moves, his fastest attacks, and he had been systematically dismantled, countered, and trapped by a boy he had spent a decade calling useless. You! Katsuki whispered, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of its usual venom. It sounded small. Broken. You didn't even use the big monster, you just played with me. Izuku slowly sat up, wincing as his exhausted muscles protested. He looked at Katsuki. There was no pity in his eyes, only a quiet, firm resolve. I didn't play with you, Kaken. I used everything I had just to survive your attacks, Izuku said, his voice soft but unwavering. Your power is incredible. But a hero doesn't just rely on power, they rely on their mind. Izuku reached to his belt, pulling out a spare nutrient bar. He tossed it across the room. It landed squarely in Katsuki's lap. You're amazing, Kaken, Izuku said, standing up on shaky legs. But I'm not behind you anymore. I'm right beside you. Izuku turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Katsuki sitting in the dark, the nutrient bar resting in his hands, staring at the back of the rival he could no longer ignore. Back in the monitor room, the class was dead silent. That was terrifying. Kaminari swallowed hard. Midoriya never went for a knockout blow. He just systematically exhausted Bakugo's options until he was checkmated. His situational awareness is flawless, Yaoyorozu agreed, taking notes furiously. He used his elements not just as weapons, but as environmental hazards. He controlled the battlefield entirely. All Might stood near the back, his heart swelling with pride. He had chosen the right boy. Midoriya Izuku was a tactical genius, a protector with a mind sharper than any crystal he could forge. You set a brilliant snare, young Midoriya, All Might thought, smiling proudly. You didn't just defeat your rival, you showed him the true depth of hero work. When Izuku finally returned to the monitor room, leaning heavily on Uraraka for support, the class erupted into applause. Even Todoroki, standing quietly in the corner, offered a subtle nod of respect. Aizawa, standing in the shadows of the hallway outside the monitor room, watched the celebration through the crack in the door. He took a slow sip from his juice pouch. Midoriya Izuku, Aizawa thought, his eyes narrowing slightly. Your quirk is immensely powerful, but it drains you completely. You're a glass cannon masquerading as a tank. But your mind is a steel trap. Aizawa turned away, walking down the dark corridor. You survived the first hurdle, kid. But the real villains won't fall for simple traps. For Izuku Midoriya, the first days at UA High School were a resounding victory. But as he stood amidst his cheering classmates, his mind was already moving forward, calculating the next step, the next element, the next upgrade. The snare was set. The arsenal was forged. But the true test was yet to come.